I turned 70 this year, a strange number if you think about it, neither young enough to feel like you've still got decades ahead of you, nor so old that people expect you to vanish into memory. 70 is limbo. The house feels larger, the nights feel longer, and birthdays, well, they feel quieter than they once did. When Margaret was alive, birthdays were more than dates on a calendar. She would bake her lemon cake, light a candle, and insist I make a wish, even if I joked that I'd already been granted the only wish I needed, the years with her. When she passed, the house didn't just lose her laughter. It lost that ritual, that heartbeat of celebration. So when the morning of my 70th came, I wasn't expecting much. A card from my daughter, maybe a polite call from my son, though even that was unlikely. Years of distance had turned his voice into a rarity, like hearing from an old colleague who only remembered you when convenient. The day passed slowly, marked by the quiet drip of the kitchen faucet and the creak of the porch boards under my feet. Evening came, the shadows stretched long, and just when I thought the day would close without incident, the doorbell rang. On the porch sat a square package, brown paper neatly folded, my name scrawled across the front in a hand I recognized instantly. My son's. I carried it inside, my fingers trembling slightly as I cut the tape. Inside, nestled in crumpled newspaper, was a bottle of whiskey, a fine one too, the kind that carries weight, the kind you don't buy without thought. A note was taped to the neck, short and blunt. To Dad. Enjoy one last drink for old times. I stared at those words for a long time. My son had never been sentimental, not even as a boy. The phrasing struck me oddly, too sharp, too final. But after years of silence, I found myself softening. Maybe this was his way of reaching out. Maybe it was an olive branch. I set the bottle on the table and sat back in my chair, the amber liquid glowing faintly under the kitchen light. The house was quiet, but my mind was restless. Should I open it? Should I pour a glass to mark this strange birthday, to honor Margaret the way I once did, with a toast to the years that carried us here? I poured nothing. Not yet. Something held me back, though I couldn't name it. A hesitation, like the faint chill before a storm you can't yet see. Instead, I placed the bottle on the counter where the light caught it, amber gleaming like a trapped fire. It looked almost alive. And that night, as I sat alone in the dark, I couldn't shake the feeling that this gift wasn't simply a bottle. It was the beginning of something else, something waiting quietly, like a shadow at the edge of the room. The bottle sat on my counter like an uninvited guest. I tried to ignore it that night, telling myself it was nothing more than a gesture. Awkward, maybe clumsy, but still a gesture. Yet every time I passed through the kitchen, my eyes strayed to it, drawn by the soft glint of amber caught in the lamplight. It reminded me of another time, another life. Margaret and I had a tradition. Every anniversary after the dishes were cleared and the music from our old record player hummed low in the background, I would pour us each a small glass of whiskey. Not much, just enough to warm the throat and the heart. She'd smile, tap her glass against mine, and whisper, "To us, Harold, to every year we've been given." It wasn't about the drink. It was about the ritual, the weight of the moment, the acknowledgement that time was fragile and precious. Seeing that bottle now, sent by my own son, stirred those memories with an ache sharper than I expected. I picked it up, running my thumb over the embossed glass. It was a good brand. Expensive. The sort of bottle you didn't just grab off a shelf at random. That alone gave me pause. My son had never been one for thoughtfulness, not even when he was young. I pulled the note from the neck again, unfolding the small square of paper. To Dad. Enjoy one last drink for old times. The words scratched at me. One last drink. Why not cheers to the years or thinking of you? Why did it sound like a farewell? I set it down, unease coiling in my stomach. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe I had grown too used to the silence between us, too used to disappointment, to believe he could offer me something without a hook. The next day I went about my routine, sweeping the porch, reading the paper, walking down to the post office, but the thought of that bottle stayed with me. At the diner, Linda, my longtime neighbor and friend, slid into the booth across from me. She was sharp-eyed as ever, the kind of woman who noticed things most people didn't. "You look distracted, Harold," she said, stirring her coffee. "Birthday blues?" I managed a small smile. 70 does weigh a bit heavier than 69, she chuckled. "That it does. But I've seen you carry heavier." Her eyes narrowed playfully. "So what's really on your mind?" I hesitated, then told her about the package, about the whiskey, about the note. Linda leaned back, lips pursed. "From your son?" "Yes." "And you're thinking of drinking it?" I frowned at her tone. "It's just whiskey, Linda." "Whiskey with a message that doesn't sit right with you," she countered. "You've always trusted your instincts, Harold. Don't ignore them now." Her words lingered long after we parted. That evening I set the bottle in the center of the dining table. I poured nothing, again. Instead, I lit a small candle, the way Margaret used to, and sat in silence. The flame flickered, casting shadows across the glass, making the liquid glow like molten gold. I whispered aloud, though no one was there to hear. "What are you trying to tell me, son?" The bottle gave no answer, but I felt the silence in the room grow heavier. It was no longer just a gift. It was a question, a test, maybe even a warning. And in that moment, I decided one thing for certain. I would not drink it alone. 2 days after my birthday, the house came alive again, though not with music or Margaret's laughter, but with the voices of my daughter and her husband. Claire had insisted on coming over for dinner, saying she didn't want me spending my 70th alone. She brought her usual bustle of energy, carrying bags of groceries, fussing over the kitchen like it was still her childhood home. Her husband, Michael, followed with his steady presence. A good man, kind, respectful, the sort who always made a point of helping me with the heavy lifting without ever making me feel old. I liked him for that. As the smell of roast chicken filled the house, Claire set the table, humming softly. "Dad," she said suddenly, "aren't you going to open that gift your son sent you?" We saw it on the counter. I froze for a moment. The bottle. It had sat there untouched for days, glowing quietly under the kitchen light, demanding attention I hadn't given it. I forced a smile. I thought I'd save it, but maybe tonight's the right time. Michael grinned. "A toast for the big 7-0. Sounds fitting to me." Claire clapped her hands together. "Perfect." I fetched the bottle, its weight heavy in my hands. The cork gave a low pop as I twisted it free, releasing a faint aroma of oak and sweetness. Nothing unusual, nothing alarming. Still, as I poured, my stomach tightened. I filled 3 glasses, Michael's, Claire's, and one for myself. The amber liquid caught the light beautifully, shimmering like something far finer than its purpose. Michael raised his glass, his smile warm. "To Harold, to 70 years of wisdom, patience, and dignity." Claire touched her glass to ours. "To Dad." We clinked gently. I lifted mine to my lips, but at the last moment I hesitated. Some instinct held me back. Instead, I smiled faintly and set it down. "I'll sip after dinner. Let's let Michael break it in." Michael chuckled. "Fair enough." He tipped the glass back and swallowed. Claire followed, though more cautiously, taking only a small sip. For a few minutes, everything was ordinary. Conversation flowed. Claire telling me about work, Michael talking about their plans for the summer. But then Michael's voice faltered. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for his fork. "Are you all right?" Claire asked, concern flashing in her eyes. Michael's face had gone pale, beads of sweat forming on his brow. I don't feel—" The words cut off as he slumped forward, his glass tipping, amber spilling across the white tablecloth. Claire screamed, leaping to his side, shaking his shoulder. "Michael! Michael!" My own heart pounded as I rushed around the table, my hand gripping the phone. "Call 911, Claire shouted through tears. Within minutes, though it felt like hours, The wail of sirens cut through the night. Paramedics rushed in, lifting Michael onto a stretcher, voices quick and urgent. Claire clung to my arm, her face stricken. "Dad, what happened? What was in that bottle?" I glanced at the table, the spilled whiskey glinting under the light, the untouched glass still sitting where I'd set it down. My mind whirled, the words of the note echoing in my head. "Enjoy one last drink for old times." Something was wrong, deeply, terribly wrong, and in that moment, as the ambulance doors slammed shut and sped into the night, I knew this wasn't a gift. It was a threat. Hospitals have a way of stripping time of its shape. The minutes stretch, the hours fold, and all that exists is the humming of fluorescent lights and the soft shuffle of hurried footsteps. Claire and I sat side by side in the waiting room, her hands trembling in her lap, her eyes fixed on the double doors that had swallowed Michael only moments before. I could still see it, the way he'd slumped forward at the dinner table, the color draining from his face, the glass of whiskey spilling across the cloth like a stain of warning. If I had drunk mine, if Margaret's memory hadn't stilled my hand at the last second. The thought twisted my stomach until I felt sick. Claire suddenly grabbed my arm. "Dad, what if he doesn't wake up?" Her voice cracked, young again in its fear, like the little girl who once clung to me during thunderstorms. I squeezed her hand firmly. "He's strong, Claire. Michael's strong. Let the doctors do their work." But my own voice lacked conviction. An hour passed, then another, each second dragging. Finally the doors opened, and a doctor stepped out, removing his mask. His expression was serious, but not hopeless, and I felt my lungs release the breath I'd been holding. "He's stable," the doctor said. "It was touch and go for a while, but he pulled through." Claire broke into sobs, covering her face with her hands. I put an arm around her shoulders, holding her as relief flooded the room. The doctor continued, his tone grave. "We're running more tests, but this wasn't food poisoning or indigestion. There were compounds in his system that don't belong there. Something was in what he drank." I stiffened. "The whiskey." The doctor nodded. "We've sent a sample to the lab. If you still have the bottle, keep it sealed and give it directly to the authorities. This could have ended much worse if he'd consumed more." Claire's head snapped up, her eyes wide. "Dad, it was the gift, the bottle my brother sent you." The words hung between us like smoke. I said nothing, but my mind reeled. One last drink for old times. Later that night, when Michael was moved to a private room, Claire stayed by his bedside, holding his hand as though she could anchor him to the earth by sheer will. I stood quietly in the doorway, watching the weight of the day pressing down on my chest. I left for home close to midnight. The house felt alien when I walked in, too quiet, too still, as though it knew what had happened. The tablecloth was still stained, the glass still tipped over, and there on the counter the bottle gleamed faintly in the dark kitchen light. I approached it slowly, staring at the amber liquid as though it were a living thing. I lifted it, turning it in my hands, searching for signs, scratches on the cork, glue where it shouldn't be, anything. But it looked ordinary, normal, deceptively so. I thought of my son, his rare phone call on my birthday, his voice flat and mechanical, his handwriting on the note, those odd words. I had wanted to believe it was an olive branch. Now, with Michael lying in a hospital bed, that hope curdled into suspicion. I poured a small amount into a glass, holding it up to the light. It caught the glow beautifully, as whiskey always does, warm and golden. But the beauty felt sinister now, like sunlight on a snake's scales. I set it down without tasting it. My heart was steady now, my mind sharpening. Something was hidden here, and I was going to find it. The morning after Michael's collapse, I woke to a house that felt colder than the April air outside. I made coffee out of habit, though it tasted bitter on my tongue. My eyes kept straying to the counter, to the bottle sitting there as if nothing had happened. I couldn't ignore it any longer. Claire had called from the hospital at dawn. Michael was awake, weak but alert, his color slowly returning. Relief steadied me, but it did nothing to soften the hard truth forming in my mind. The whiskey had done this. Not bad food, not a weak stomach, the whiskey. I picked up the bottle again, holding it to the light. No broken seal, no tampering I could see. But the doctor had been clear. Something foreign was in Michael's system. That meant the bottle itself was compromised, and whoever had sent it had known exactly what they were doing. I unfolded the note once more. The paper was creased now from my hands, the words etched into my mind. To Dad, enjoy one last drink for old times. One last drink. I thought of my son, Daniel, the boy I had raised with discipline and patience, the young man who once looked at me like I hung the moon, before bitterness and resentment soured his eyes. We hadn't spoken much in years. Arguments over money, over choices, over pride. He always claimed I hadn't given him enough, hadn't supported him enough. But this? Could he truly have wanted me gone? The phone rang sharply, breaking my thoughts. It was the police. They asked me to bring the bottle to the station for testing. I agreed, wrapping it carefully in a towel before placing it in a paper bag. My hands trembled as I drove downtown, not from age, but from something heavier. Betrayal that hadn't yet been proven, but was already digging its claws into my heart. At the precinct, the officer behind the counter accepted the bottle with professional calm. "We'll send it to the state lab," he said. "It'll take some time, but we'll know exactly what's in it." As I signed the intake form, my eyes caught the words written on the chain of custody slip. Possible tampering. On the drive home, silence pressed in on me. Every streetlight seemed to burn longer, every red glow stretching the minutes. I thought of Margaret, of how she had trusted people, even when they failed her. She would have wanted me to believe in Daniel, to hold on to the idea that blood runs deeper than resentment. But I couldn't ignore the weight of suspicion. Not anymore. That evening, Linda stopped by, her knock light against the doorframe. She carried a casserole, though her eyes told me she already knew about Michael. News travels fast in a small town. "How is he?" she asked gently as I let her in. "Better," I said. "Awake. The doctors say he'll recover." She exhaled in relief, setting the dish on the counter, but her gaze drifted to the empty space where the bottle had been. "And the whiskey?" "Turned it in," I replied. "They'll test it." Linda folded her arms, her voice low. "You think Daniel meant for you to drink it?" It wasn't a question. I met her eyes, steady now. I don't know what else to think. Silence stretched between us. Finally, she placed a hand on my arm. "Then don't let it go. If he wanted to erase you, Harold, you make sure the world knows the truth." Her words steadied me. That night, I sat at my desk with Margaret's old journal, open, the same one I'd been using to record everything since Frank cut down my maple years ago. I began a new entry, careful and exact. April 19th. Michael collapsed after drinking whiskey gifted by Daniel. Doctor suspects foreign substance. Bottle turned over to police. Note wording suspicious. One last drink. Must not forget detail. Each word felt like a brick laid in a wall of evidence. A wall I would need because suspicion wasn't enough. Proof was what mattered. And proof was coming. Sleep came in fragments the night after I turned the bottle in. Thin pains of rest, easily shattered by the smallest creak or the faintest memory. I woke before dawn to a house that felt both familiar and strange, as if the walls themselves were listening. In the quiet kitchen light, yesterday's coffee cup sat where I'd left it, and the tablecloth still bore the faint amber stain from Michael's glass. The bottle was gone, but its absence had a shape, and that shape pressed against me like a question I had to answer. I brewed fresh coffee and carried the mug to the dining room, where the shipping box still waited on a chair. I hadn't touched it since the ambulance took Michael away. The brown paper was creased at the corners, the clear packing tape dulled with fingerprints. My son's hand, the same, hand that once built model planes at this very table, had wrapped this box. The thought made my throat tighten. I set the box on the table and opened it carefully, the way you might open an old letter from a friend who is no longer a friend. Inside, beneath the crumpled newspaper, I found only silence and dust, until my fingers brushed a sliver of thermal paper pressed flat along the inner seam. It had been invisible the first time, stuck by static. Now it peeled free with a faint hiss. A receipt. I smoothed it flat under my palm. The ink had faded just enough to make me squint, but the store name was clear. River Bend Wine and Spirits. The date was 2 days before my birthday. Under the item list, one bottle of the exact brand my son had sent, there was an odd notation from the register. Memiakrasist, cap check. A credit card authorization code followed, and beneath that, a scribble where the clerk had tried to write a phone number but given up halfway. Cap check. I didn't know what that meant, not exactly, but I knew how it felt. Like a thread hanging from a sweater, begging to be pulled. I dressed, tucked the receipt into my wallet, and left a note for Claire in case she stopped by from the hospital. Gone into town. Back by noon. Call if anything changes. The morning held the kind of brittle cold that makes the sidewalk sound hollow underfoot. When I drove through the square, the bakery windows were fogged with the heat of ovens, and the diner's neon open flickered like a tired eye. River Bend Wine and Spirits sat 2 blocks down, wedged between a locksmith and a florist that sold geraniums, even in months when nothing should bloom. Inside, the air carried the warm oak smell of shelving and the faint mineral scent of cold glass. A woman with a barcode scanner and a halfway smile glanced up from behind the counter. She had a pen tucked behind one ear and the alert look of someone who had seen enough of life to learn where to keep her kindness and where to keep her guard. "Morning," she said. "Help you find something?" "I hope so," I replied, laying the receipt on the counter. "I'm looking for information, not a bottle." Her smile faded a shade. She pulled the receipt toward her with 2 fingers, scanning it with quick, practiced eyes. "You bought this?" "No," I said, "but it was in the box with a bottle someone sent me." "My son." I paused, watching her face. "There was an incident at my home. Someone drank from the bottle and got sick. The police have it now." The little muscle in her jaw tightened. "I'm sorry to hear that." She turned the receipt, reading the line again. "This code's ours. And yes, Imjire, assist. Cap check means a customer asked a manager to examine the tamper ring on the cap. Not common, but not unheard of with pricier bottles." She hesitated. "Do you mind if I get the manager?" "Please." She slipped through a half door and returned with a man in his 50s, broad shoulders, silvering hair, a tie that knew how to behave. He introduced himself as Walt and took the receipt in a careful hand. "We've had a run of counterfeit corks in the city," he said, not yet looking at me. "Folks get jumpy, but most of the time it's nothing. Let's see." He looked closer, then up at me. "You said your son bought this?" "Yes." He nodded toward a small tablet by the register. "We can't share credit card details, but we can confirm transaction notes." He tapped, scrolled, pinched the screen. "Here it is. Item matches. Date matches. See this?" He turned the screen so I could read. Beneath the line items, in a field for comment, was a sentence. Customer asked if cap could be opened and retorqued without breaking band. Without breaking band. For a moment the store felt too warm. Voices from an aisle over, someone debating Pinot versus Syrah, sounded far away and unimportant. I swallowed. "Do you remember who asked?" Walt glanced at the clerk, who lifted a hand. "If it's the one I'm thinking of, I helped the manager. Tall guy, late 30s, maybe 40, dark coat, didn't smile much. Came in with a picture on his phone of the exact bottle. Said it was for his father's birthday." She looked at me with apology blooming in her eyes. "Is the person okay? The one who got sick?" "He's alive," I said. The steadiness in my voice surprised me. "He drank a sip to toast my 70th. The doctors think it saved him that he stopped after that." The manager's face closed with a kind of practiced sympathy. "Sir, I'm not a police officer, But if the lab confirms what you suspect, they may call us for our footage and records. We keep a 30-day video loop. He glanced at the tablet again. This purchase was 26 days ago. If you want the footage preserved, you should file a formal request fast. Today. Can you hold it until they ask? He straightened, then nodded. We can flag it. I'll do that now. He typed, then slid the tablet aside. There's one more thing. The customer asked if he could examine the cap before purchase. We don't mind, as long as it stays sealed. He held it to the light and asked about the glue line. Said his father could tell if a cork wasn't seated right. Walt's mouth twitched with a humor that couldn't find a place to land. Seemed proud of that. I worked my hands against each other to release a stiffness that had nothing to do with January. Proud. My son always preferred to be right, rather than kind. As a boy, he had counted victories like coins. As a man, he counted slights the same way. I had known that about him. I had loved him anyway. Did he pay by card? I asked. Yes, said the clerk, checking the screen. Chip. We can't share the number, but I remember him asking if the cap could be reseated after a look. That stuck with me. She looked toward the back room, then back to me. Sir, if this is what it sounds like, I'm sorry. I thanked them both and stepped back into the thin winter sun. The scent of geraniums from the florist drifted into the chill, absurd and brave. I stood by my car for a moment, letting the air cool my face. In my pocket, the receipt had warmed from the heat of my hand. I thought of Margaret's steady counsel. Don't chase shadows, Harold. Name them, then you'll know where to stand. I drove from the liquor store to the precinct without letting the engine cool. The lobby smelled of paper and old coffee. The same officer from yesterday took the receipt and the new information down with the grave politeness that good officers learn from time and hard lessons. We'll add this to the case file, he said. If you're comfortable writing a statement about where and how you found the receipt, that'll help chain of custody. We'll also request the footage immediately. Clock's ticking. I'm comfortable, I said. More than that, I'm certain. He watched my face for a moment in that careful way people do when they're just weighing whether a person is strong enough for what's ahead. Then he slid a form across the counter. I sat and wrote. The scratch of the pen on paper sounded like something being built, plank by plank, an honest sound. When I got home, the house felt less like a stranger. Maybe it was the daylight pooling in the front room, or the way the maple stump outside had caught a fringe of frost that glittered like a crown. I made a sandwich I didn't taste and sat with Margaret's journal. The entry wrote itself, April 21st. Found receipt in shipping box, Riverbend Wine and Spirits. Notation, MemJR assist, cap check. Store records show customer asked about opening reseating cap without breaking band. Clerk recalls man saying it was for his father's birthday, had picture of bottle. Manager will preserve footage, police notified. I set down the pen and ran my fingers along the page as though the words could steady my pulse. They did, a little. In the afternoon, Claire called from the hospital. Her voice was tired in the way a daughter's voice gets when she has carried too much hope for too many hours. He's better today, Dad, sitting up for a few minutes at a time. They say he'll need rest, but we're going to be okay. Her breath caught. Did you find anything? I did. I told her about the receipt, the cap question, the store's footage. There was a long pause on the line. I want to say he wouldn't, she whispered. I want to say Daniel wouldn't do this, but I remember the last holiday. How he talked to you. The way he looked at your house like it owed him something. Another breath. What happens now? Now we don't guess, I said quietly. We let the facts arrive. We hold the door open for the truth, and we sit still enough to hear it. After we hung up, I walked the length of the house and back again, the way men do when the thing they can't fix has to be born. I found myself in the small room Margaret called the library, under the window that sees the street. Children were riding bikes, 2 wobbling, 1 sure. A mother called a name that sounded like the bell on our old porch cat's collar. Life went on, politely unaware. At dusk, there came a soft knock. Linda stood on the step with a small bag from the bakery. "You looked thin at the diner," she said, handing it over. "Eat?" I told her about the receipt and the store, about the footage. She listened the way good friends listen, with her eyes, not just her ears. "Cap check," she said when I finished. "That's not a phrase an ordinary person would use." "No," I agreed. "It's a phrase a man uses when he's figured out how to do a wrong thing and wants to be certain he won't get caught doing it." She was quiet a long time. "You know the hardest part is still ahead." "Yes." I folded the bakery bag closed and set it on the table for later. "When the facts arrive, we'll have to look at them, all the way. And if they point where you think they do?" "Then I'll do what has to be done," I said. "I'll sit where the law sits. I'll tell the truth in a voice that doesn't shake." Linda reached out and squeezed my forearm in that brisk, practical way of hers. "Good, because that's how a man keeps his dignity when other people lose theirs." After she left, the house settled. Night filled the rooms with the kind of darkness that has a weight. I turned on the lamp in the front hall and left it burning, an old habit from the years when the kids stayed out too late and Margaret pretended not to worry. I sat with the phone on the table and my hands folded, ready for it to ring. It didn't, not that night, but I had the receipt. I had a clerk's memory and a manager's promise. I had a paper trail and a line of questions that had no good answers unless you squinted and forgot the shape of the family you loved. And I had Michael breathing, which was a mercy I did not take lightly. Before bed, I wrote one more sentence in the journal, a line under the others like a final plank in a bridge you're afraid to cross, but know you must. When a gift asks to be believed, look for the hand that wrapped it. I closed the book, turned out the light, and let the dark have the house. Upstairs, the bed held the same cool rectangle of space it always had since Margaret left, and I lay in it like a man afloat. Sleep came, and with it, a dream of my son at 10 years old, eyes bright, showing me the wing of a model airplane he'd sanded smooth. He had wanted me to be proud. I had been. Morning would come with the sound of a phone and the next piece of truth. I knew it the way a man knows rain is in the air. Somewhere in a lab where men and women bent over vials and machines, the bottle that had nearly killed my son-in-law was giving up its secrets. And in a back room above a stockroom that smelled of cardboard and oak, a hard drive blinked, holding a picture of a man at a counter, asking whether a cap could be opened and closed without anyone knowing. It is a peculiar thing to feel both dread and relief at once. But that is what I felt as I drifted at last. Relief that I'd found the thread. Dread at what tugging it would reveal. I thought of Margaret's toast, of all the anniversaries behind us, of the way she would tap my glass with a smile and say, "To us, Harold, to every year we've been given." "Tomorrow," I said to the empty room, "to the truth." And the house, faithful companion that it is, said nothing at all, only held me until the first bird called up the morning. The call came just after 7, the phone's modest ring sounding louder than it had any right to in the quiet of my kitchen. I had been sitting with Margaret's journal open and a cup of coffee cooling at my elbow, telling myself that I wouldn't stare at the clock the way a boy waits for the bell. It didn't matter, of course. Waiting has its own gravity. You orbit it whether you want to or not. "Mr. Whitman?" The voice was measured, a woman's tone tuned by years of saying hard things plainly. "Detective Nora Halstead, County Police. Lab results came in early. Are you able to talk?" I stood without meaning to, as if good news or bad should be taken on my feet. "I am." "There were 2 compounds present in the liquid recovered from the bottle," she said. "The first is a potent central nervous system depressant. The second is a cardioactive agent that can drive down heart rate and blood pressure in combination. Together, in the concentration detected, they could incapacitate most adults quickly. Your son-in-law is fortunate he didn't consume more." The words arrived like stepping stones in a river, solid and cold, Not rumor, not fear, facts. I let them stand in me for a moment, then asked, "Tampering?" "Yes," she said. "We found microscopic evidence of a pin bore through the cork, small enough to reseal without obvious damage, and adhesive along the cap band that isn't from the manufacturer. Whoever prepared it took pains to keep the closure looking intact. Our chemist said the distribution pattern inside the neck suggests injection after bottling." A breath I didn't know I held left me. Even so, I felt strangely steady, like a man who has suspected rain for days and finally hears it on the roof. "You have the shipping box and the receipt from Riverbend Wine and Spirits in the evidence file." "I do," she answered, and a softer note entered her voice. Not kindness exactly, but a recognition that the ground under my life was shifting. "I also have a store manager waiting on our preservation request for his video footage. We'll retrieve it this morning. You mentioned a clerk remembered your son asking about caps, and you found cap check in the register notes." "I did." I glanced at the chair where the box had sat, as if it might still outline the guilt it had carried. "He said the whiskey was for his father. He brought a picture. He asked if a cap could be opened and retorqued without breaking the band. We'll need a formal identification if the footage shows who we expect it to show," she said. "But I'll ask you to do something difficult in the meantime, Mr. Whitman." "Yes." "Don't contact him. Don't let this change your routine. Men who do a thing like this, they listen for the ground to tremble after. Let us see whether he's still standing on it." I promised I wouldn't call. After we hung up, I stood at the window with the phone still in my hand, watching the light move across the maple stump until the pale wood gleamed like bone. The house was so quiet I could hear the clock in the dining room, counting out seconds it had counted for 30 years. I thought of Daniel when he was 10, cheeks flushed from running the bases at the town field, throwing his cap on the counter and asking if I'd seen the hit. He had wanted my pride the way boys do, like a medal, like air. It is an unkind truth that memory does not protect you from the present. I went to the hospital to see Claire and Michael before the detective's next call. Hospitals carry their own weather, overbright cloudless days that never change, a wind of air conditioning that smells faintly of polish and antiseptic. Michael was upright, a shade too pale, a monitor tracing out his heart's private hieroglyphs. Claire rubbed his forearm with her thumb, a small, repetitive motion that looked less like comfort and more like prayer. "Detective called," I said quietly after the nurse left. "The lab confirmed tampering." Claire's eyes found mine. I watched the understanding move across her face in stages. Relief first, that we weren't chasing a phantom, then the ache that attends clarity, and finally something quiet and hard. "Dad," she whispered, voice low so it wouldn't break. "If the footage shows him, I don't know what I'm going to do." "You're going to breathe," I said, as if breath were a thing a father could give. "You're going to remember that the truth is not a thing we choose because it's easy. It's a place we stand because we must." Michael managed a crooked smile. "Tell the detective I owe her a thank you card, and maybe a better hobby than drinking what comes in the mail." He meant it as a joke, and we let it be one because jokes are small bridges over water we otherwise couldn't cross. The second call came just after noon, as I was pulling into my driveway. "Halstead," the detective said by way of greeting, and her voice told me this wasn't a courtesy call. "We have the footage from Riverbend. Timestamp aligns with your receipt. The customer approaches the counter with a photo of the brand on his phone, asks about the cap, requests a manager. He holds the bottle up to the light, turning it slowly. Camera angle catches his face on reflection in the cooler door. The image is clean enough. I'd like you to come down and make a formal ID." There are moments when it feels like the day tilts. You don't fall. The world simply rearranges itself by degrees. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, I said. Detective Halstead met me in a small room adjacent to the records office, the kind of room towns set aside for unpleasant business. A table, 2 chairs, paint too white to be kind. She had a neat stack of forms and a calm that didn't evaporate under fluorescent lights. On the screen, paused mid-motion, a man held a bottle and a phone. The bombast of a liquor store display reflected in the pane of glass behind him. The clerk's head was turned. The manager's tie cut a tidy diagonal toward the register keys. The customer's profile was a quarter turn from the lens, caught in the reflection like a fish under clear water. "Ready?" Halstead asked. I nodded. She let the video roll. The man approached, phone up. He spoke animatedly. No sound, only hands. The clerk nodded, glanced to the back. The manager arrived. The bottle changed hands. The customer gestured at the cap, then at the thin line of the tamper band. He pointed to the cork, made a small pinching motion with his fingers. The manager shook his head, then, after a sentence and a shrug, set the bottle back on the counter, while the customer turned it against the light, studying the seam. The camera caught his face in the glass again, this time full. The mouth I recognized before the eyes, my father's mouth and mine. The line of his jaw, the haircut he'd worn since college because change never sat easy. It wasn't a memory. It was a mirror held up to the part of my life that had once laughed at my jokes and asked me to tie his skates. Detective Halstead paused the frame. "Mr. Whitman?" "That's my son," I said. The sentence entered the room, and it seemed to make everything brighter and colder, the way snowlight does. "Daniel Whitman." "Thank you." She clicked to a form and slid it toward me. "Sign and date." "This places your identification in the record. We may ask the store employees for their statements today as well." I signed, my hand steady in a way that surprised me. Steadiness is a thing you can practice over years without knowing you're practicing it. Raising children will do that, and so will being the man who sits at the head of a table and refuses to shout when others do. "Next steps?" I asked. "We'll correlate the lab results with the purchase and the alleged victim's medical report. We'll request the shipping store's kiosk records for label printing and surveillance. There's often a camera over the station where packages get taped. If your son prepared the box himself, we may get more images." She hesitated a moment, then added, "We'll also examine his financials if we get a judge to sign off. Card used at River Bend, pattern of purchases, anything that suggests planning." She watched me with a kind of professional gentleness, the kind that has no softness in it, but is no less humane for being hard. "I know this is not the version of your son anyone wants to carry," she said, "but it is the version a court needs to see." "I understand," I said, and I did. Understanding isn't solace, but it is a shape you can lean against. I called Claire in the car with the air on low because my hands wouldn't stop feeling hot. I described the footage in plain language and the way the clerk had remembered his questions. I didn't tell her about the mouth that matched mine. She already knew where the resemblance sat. It lived in her, too, in her stubbornness, in her good sense, in the way she did not cry until the door was closed. "Detective says not to reach out," I told her. "If we rattle him, he could run, or worse, he could decide to make more noise." "I won't call him," she said, "but I will be in that courtroom when the time comes. Not to watch you suffer, to watch the truth stand up straight." I drove home by the long way that runs past the field where the town plays summer baseball and the concession stand sells popsicles that taste like the color they are. The diamond was empty, chalk lines still bright. I could see Daniel at 8, in a jersey too big, pushing his cap back because the bill made a shadow on the ball. He had grinned with both rows of teeth then, elbows skinned, knees green. I stood there with my hands on the chain link and thought, the distance between that boy and this frame on a police monitor is not measured in miles. It's measured in choices, countless, each one a step. At home, Linda was waiting on my front steps with 2 paper cups that smelled of cinnamon and something kind. I told her in a few sentences what the detective had shown me. She closed her eyes a moment, the way a person does when they're filing news under the right label, so it doesn't slide loose and break things in its fall. "Then the bottle has spoken," she said softly. "It has." And you'll let the law answer back. I will. We sat without talking for a while, the late light moving across the porch and up the siding like a tide. After she left, I went inside and opened the journal again. The page accepted my pen the way old friends accept one another's truths, with no flinching. April 22nd. Lab confirms tampering, sedative plus cardioactive agent, injected via pin bore, adhesive residue on cap band inconsistent with manufacturer. Detective Nora Halstead recovered Riverbend footage. Daniel requesting cap inspection, examining seam, holding bottle to light. Formal ID completed. Instruction: do not contact him. Next steps: shipping kiosk footage, clerk manager statements, chain extended. I capped the pen and rested my palm on the words until the ink had dried. Then I set the book aside and walked to the kitchen. I took out a clean glass, poured water, and held it up. Not a toast, just a pause. There are moments in a man's life when he decides to be more than the sum of what has been done to him. If dignity has a taste, it is this: plain, cool, earned. Night came, as it always does, and the house slipped into it like a ship into harbor. Before bed, I stood at the window and watched the street lamps spill their weak halos onto the curb. Somewhere in town, a hard drive now held images that would refuse to lie, for anyone. In a refrigerator drawer at the lab, sealed vials waited with the patience of evidence, and in the morning I would wake again and do the ordinary things that keep a man tethered to himself: sweep the porch, check the mail, visit the hospital, answer the detective's call. The truth had started speaking in complete sentences. I could hear each one. I did not cover my ears. When I finally lay down, I did not dream of poison or bottles or quartz. I dreamed of Margaret in the cardigan she wore to rake leaves, hair caught by the wind, laughing, saying, "You did the brave thing, Harold. You sat still, and you told the truth when it asked to be heard." "Tomorrow," I said under the quiet room, the word small and sufficient. "Tomorrow we go get the rest of it." Detective Halstead had told me to live as though nothing had changed. But something had changed. Everything had. When you've seen your son's face flicker across a police monitor as evidence, the world doesn't arrange itself back into neat rows. The air feels different, heavier. Even silence carries weight. I tried to follow her advice. I swept the porch, raked the yard, and carried groceries from the car like any other man. Neighbors waved, some with curiosity in their eyes, sensing something beneath the surface, but polite enough not to ask. Linda visited most evenings, her presence grounding me, her words short and steady. "Patience, Harold," she reminded me, sipping tea on the porch. "The law moves slow, but it moves." I nodded, but inside I felt the coil of tension winding tighter. The first sign that Daniel sensed trouble came 2 days later. My phone buzzed with a call I didn't answer. His name lit the screen, sharp against the background like a wound. I watched it ring until it stopped, then sat at the table staring at the silence left behind. A message arrived minutes later. "Dad, we should talk. I know you got my gift. Haven't heard from you. Call me." Gift. The word turned sour in my mouth. I didn't reply. Later that night, Claire called from the hospital. Michael was improving, walking slowly with the help of a nurse. She sounded relieved but tired, her voice tinged with the anger she'd been holding back. "Dad," she whispered, "I can't wrap my head around it. If it was Daniel, if he really did this—" She broke off, then steadied herself. "Promise me you won't face him alone." "I won't," I assured her. "The police have the reins now." Still, the thought of my son pressing his thumb against that cork, rehearsing the lie of a gift, haunted me. The following morning, Detective Halstead called. Her voice carried that clipped steadiness that only comes when things are moving forward. "Mr. Whitman, we've retrieved footage from the shipping kiosk Daniel used. Clear image of him packaging the bottle, taping the box. It corroborates the store evidence." I sat in silence for a long moment. "So the chain is complete?" "Yes. Once the judge reviews, we'll issue a warrant. He doesn't know yet. Stay quiet. Stay quiet. That had become my role in this story, the man who held his tongue while the truth stacked itself brick by brick. That afternoon, Daniel tried again. This time it was an email. The subject line short. You there? The body of the message read, Dad, I've been thinking. We've had our differences, but you know I'd never hurt you. Let's meet and talk. Families should stick together. I read it 3 times. The words looked harmless, even conciliatory, but I could feel the unease pulsing between each line. He wanted reassurance, not reconciliation. He wanted to know if the ground was shifting under him. I closed the message without reply. At dusk, Linda came by with a loaf of bread wrapped in foil. She saw the tightness in my face and asked no questions until we were both sitting on the porch. Finally, I told her about the calls, the message, the email. She listened, her hands folded in her lap. When I finished, she said simply, He's rattled. The guilty always are. That's not your burden, Harold. Don't let his shadow live in your house. Her words settled in me like stones in a riverbed, steadying the current. That night, before bed, I wrote in Margaret's journal, April 25th. Daniel has reached out, calls, messages, email, language strain, testing, detectives confirm kiosk footage, him sealing the package. Chain is whole. Warrant soon. My silence feels like armor, heavy but necessary. When I closed the book, the house felt still again, but outside the maple saplings swayed in the night breeze, their young leaves catching the moonlight. I stood at the window and thought of Margaret's voice. To every year we've been given, I whispered back, and to every truth that must be carried. The warrant arrived the way official things do, without ceremony, wrapped in plain language that leaves no room for argument. Detective Halstead called just after dawn, her voice clipped but not unkind. Mr. Whitman, the judge signed in the early hours. We're serving it today. A brief pause, as if allowing the words to find their chair in the room. Do not alter your routine. We expect him at his apartment by 9. Alter my routine, as if anyone could once the truth begins moving with its own stride. Still, I dressed the way I always do on a weekday. Pressed shirt, old cardigan, the one Margaret teased me about because the elbows had gone thin and I refused to retire it. I made coffee, swept the porch, and brought in the paper. The house felt alert, as if it too were listening for the sound of boots on stairs and the quiet authority of a knock that means the world has changed its mind about the story it's been told. By 8:30, I was in the car, not because I intended to intrude on the police at their work, but because I needed to be somewhere that could hold the moment properly. The town had never felt narrower than it did on that short drive. Every storefront seemed to lean in, every crosswalk light to pause just a second longer than necessary. I parked half a block from Daniel's building and sat with my hands on the wheel, a man between past and present, breathing slowly to keep from running. Detective Halstead appeared at the corner with 2 officers I didn't know. She spotted me, gave the smallest nod a person can give and still be seen, then turned her attention to the entry. The lobby door clicked open under the super's key. The stairwell swallowed them. I stepped from the car and stood by the curb, not closer, not farther, held in place by a line I could feel but couldn't see. Time went long and then suddenly short, the way it does in rooms where decisions are made. A door above opened, a man's voice rose, then sharpened, then broke. I knew the shape of that break. It was the sound of a person discovering that denial is a poor lock. Footsteps, hard and quick. Then the stairwell delivered them, Halstead first, composed, 1 officer behind her. Daniel between them, not yet in cuffs, his jaw set in the angle of a boy who never learned how to lose. He saw me before he saw the street, because that is how sons navigate, by the faces that taught them the map of the world. His eyes flashed anger first, then calculation, then a kind of pleading he kept hidden, even from himself. Dad, he said, as if it were an argument, Tell them. Tell them this is a mistake." Detective Halstead didn't look at me. Her voice was even. "Daniel Whitman, you are under arrest for attempted poisoning, aggravated battery by means of a harmful substance, and related charges." She began the litany of rights, steady as a metronome. A neighbor's door opened upstairs. Another face appeared at the lobby glass. The town, polite as ever, took its places for the performance it never wanted to watch. He shook his head, a short, stiff motion. "This is insane," he said, louder now. Words aimed at the ceiling, at anyone who would listen. "That bottle was a gift. He's my father." I felt the sentence land in me and pass through, as if I'd become a window for it to exit by. Gifts don't come with needles, I said quietly, not moving toward him, not away. "The lab found the hole you made." He flinched at that, a small, involuntary thing, the kind the body does when it recognizes its own handwriting. For half a second the fight bled out of him and left only a young man with too many debts. No one had asked him to accrue. Then the defiance returned, brittle as old glass. "You're doing this," he hissed. "You've always wanted to ruin me." Detective Halstead stepped in, the way professionals do when the conversation tries to turn itself into a weapon. "Mr. Whitman," she said to me, calm but firm, "thank you for being here, but we need to proceed." To Daniel, a different tone. "Sir, place your hands behind your back." The cuffs clicked, a simple, efficient sound, and the morning took on a kind of clarity I had not known was possible. The scene was smaller than I had imagined it would be, if I ever imagined it at all. A curb, a quiet street, the scent of stale coffee drifting from the bodega, a gull complaining somewhere above the roofline. Life does not pause for justice. It simply widens to include it. As they guided him toward the car, Daniel twisted enough to get one more look at me. "You could have called me," he said, voice low now, hoarse with the effort of anger. "You could have asked." "I did ask," I said, and the steadiness in my own tone surprised me. "I asked the bottle. It told the truth." He looked as if he might spit a reply, then thought better of spending breath he could not bill to someone else. The door closed. Halstead's expression softened by a degree I would not have noticed a year ago. I have learned to see small mercies when they pass. "We'll be in touch this afternoon," she said, a sentence that meant paperwork and statements, and the long arithmetic of consequence. After they left, the block exhaled. The upstairs neighbor retreated. The lobby glass became a mirror again. I stood alone for a moment, breathing the air my son had just breathed, then walked the half-block to my car like a man carrying a folded flag, careful not because the weight is heavy, but because it is sacred. On the way to the hospital, I stopped at the river, because the river knows what to do with a morning like that. It moved past without hurrying, patient with stones, uninterested in drama, reminding me that time is larger than anyone hurt. I leaned on the rail and let the cold lift off the water and onto my face until the tightness in my chest became something I could set down without breaking. Claire met me in the hallway, outside Michael's room. I didn't need to say anything. She read the news in the careful way I closed the door behind me. She pressed her lips together, nodded once, and then the nod broke into a sob she caught in the crook of her elbow. I held her, not the way men sometimes hold grief at arm's length, but the way fathers must, with both hands and all the steadiness they have left. "Did he look at you?" she asked when the first storm passed. "Yes." "What did you see?" "A boy who knew the rules once and forgot why they mattered." I paused. "And a man who believed he could cheat the test and still pass." She wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand. "I'll be there when they arraign him," she said, not as a threat, but as a statement of geography, where she would stand when the truth stood up in public. Michael was stronger. Color returned to his cheeks like a sunrise nobody clapped for, because the day does it every time, whether or not anyone is looking. He gave me a smile that reached the place behind his eyes. "Heard they took the bottle's author for a ride," he said. "I'm still here. Seems like a good exchange." We didn't stay long. Hospitals tire you without asking permission. On the drive home, the town returned to its ordinary tasks, unstirred by the knowledge that for 3 people who lived among it, the axis had shifted. I parked, went inside, and opened Margaret's journal to a fresh page. April 27th. Warrant served at Daniel's residence. Detective Halstead present. Arrest without incident, aside from the noise men make when the world stops, accommodating their story. He looked at me and asked for mercy. In other words, I did not lie for him, and I did not gloat. The cuffs were ordinary. The morning was bright. The truth did not apologize for arriving. I set down the pen and let the ink dry. The house was very quiet, the way rooms are after a guest has left and the furniture remembers where it belongs. I made tea I didn't particularly want and carried it to the porch. The maple saplings in the yard gave their small approval to the wind. Across the street, Linda raised a hand from her stoop without asking the first question people always want to ask. I nodded back. Sometimes a nod is the bravest language we have. When the phone rang again, it was Halstead, already where the day had placed her. "Arraignment in the morning," she said. "I'll bring you the charging documents tonight. Try to rest." "I will," I said, which was a promise to attempt something impossible and necessary. After we hung up, I sat a long while with the teacup warming my palm. There would be more to carry. Statements, hearings, looks from people who loved us and people who didn't. But the hinge had turned. A door that had been stuck for years opened on its rusty pin, and though the sound it made was not pretty, it was honest. The sun found the edge of the porch roof and then slipped past it. Evening came on in its reliable way, tender to no one and yet somehow kind to all. I stood, stretched the stiffness from my back, and went inside to switch on the lamp in the hall. A small lighthouse I have kept for decades, because people you love should always find their way if they choose to come. I did not expect Daniel to walk through that again, but I would keep the light anyway, not for him, for me, for the man I have spent 70 years trying to be, one who tells the truth when it knocks, one who does not shout when a whisper will do, one who stands where the law stands because there is dignity in that posture even when it hurts. And when sleep finally came, it greeted me without argument. The house, faithful as ever, folded itself around the silence and held it the way a good friend does, without fixing it, without naming it, just staying long enough that you remember you are not alone. The courthouse in our county isn't grand. It doesn't have marble columns or sweeping staircases like the buildings you see in the city. It's brick and modest. Its walls lined with portraits of judges who once presided in dark robes, their eyes painted steady as anchors. But that morning, walking through its doors, I felt like I was stepping into the center of something larger than myself. Detective Halstead met me at the entrance. She was brisk as always, hair pulled back, folder under her arm. "Mr. Whitman," she said with a nod. "It'll be quick, just the arraignment. He'll enter a plea. The charges will be read. No testimony today." Her words steadied me, though the knot in my stomach didn't ease. It wasn't the formality that unnerved me. It was the knowledge that the man standing before that bench would be my son. The courtroom smelled faintly of old paper and polish. A few reporters sat scattered across the benches, their pens poised like hawks. Neighbors had come too, curious faces trying to hide behind polite expressions. Claire sat beside me, her hands clasped tightly together, her knuckles pale. Michael, still recovering but determined, had insisted on being there, a blanket draped over his shoulders, his presence quiet but firm. When the bailiff called the room to order, Daniel was led in. His hands were free this time, but the orange jumpsuit marked him as surely as chains. For a moment he looked everywhere but at me, at the judge, the ceiling, the floor. Finally his eyes landed on mine. There was no plea for help in them now, only defiance, brittle and sharp. The judge's voice filled the room, steady and unhurried. "Daniel Whitman, you are charged with attempted poisoning, aggravated battery by means of a harmful substance, and reckless endangerment. How do you plead? Daniel's lawyer, a man I didn't know with a suit too shiny to be trusted, leaned close and whispered. Daniel lifted his chin, his voice loud enough to echo, "Not guilty." The words rang hollow, bouncing off walls that already knew better. The judge set the trial date and ordered him held without bond, citing the seriousness of the offense. Papers shuffled, gavels struck wood, and just like that, the hearing was over. But for me, the weight had only grown heavier. As the guards led him out, Daniel twisted again to look at me. His lips moved, shaping words meant, "Only for me. Traitor?" The letters cut, even without sound. For all the evidence, for all the truth, he still saw me as the one who had betrayed him. Outside, the spring air felt cold. Reporters pressed close, asking for statements, but Halstead waved them off. Claire held my arm tightly as we walked down the steps. "Don't listen to him, Dad," she whispered fiercely. "He did this to himself, not you." I nodded, but my throat was tight. At home, the house felt heavier than it had in weeks. The journal lay open on the table, waiting. I sat down and forced myself to write. April 28th. Daniel pled not guilty, called me a traitor with his eyes. It is harder than I thought to stand where truth stands, but dignity does not move, even when blood tries to pull it away. Later, Linda stopped by. She brought soup, as she always did when she knew I hadn't eaten properly. We sat on the porch while the sun dipped low. She didn't speak for a long time, letting the silence do the work. Finally, she said softly, "It's a hard thing, Harold, to love someone and still let them face what they've done. But it's the only way love means anything." Her words held me steady. That night, before I went to bed, I found myself standing at the window again, looking out at the young maple saplings, swaying in the dark. They didn't care about trials or courtrooms. They only cared about growing where they'd been planted. And maybe, I thought, that's what I had to do too. Grow where truth had planted me, no matter how painful the soil. The first day of the trial dawned with that particular brightness spring sometimes brings, a clean, almost too hopeful light that makes even old brick look young. I wished it had been raining. Sunshine felt disrespectful to the work the day intended to do. I dressed slowly, buttoning the same blue shirt I wore to Margaret's memorial, and when I tied my shoes, I found my hands steady in a way that surprised me. There is a steadiness a man earns over decades, through report cards and mortgages, and the long practice of not saying the first unkind thing that comes to mind. And I leaned on it now like a railing at the top of a long flight of stairs. Inside the courthouse, the air was cool and smelled faintly of wax and paper. Claire was already seated 2 rows back, her hands wrapped around each other as if she could keep her heart inside them by force of will. Michael sat beside her, pale but upright, a courthouse blanket folded across his knees, the way a man might wear a small flag. I squeezed his shoulder as I passed. He nodded, and the gratitude in his eyes felt like a blessing I had not earned and could not refuse. When the bailiff called us to rise, the judge entered with the careful gravity of a person who knows words, can move men, and also break them. He was not old exactly, but he carried himself as if time had been a patient tutor. The jury filed in, 12 strangers who would be asked to sit very close to our family without touching it, each with a face that looked ordinary until you noticed how hard they were listening. On the other side of the room, Daniel sat at counsel table in a suit that didn't quite fit, jaw clenched, eyes fixed on a middle distance that did not include me. His attorney whispered in his ear, and he nodded without truly hearing, the way boys nod when they have already decided to disobey. The state laid out its case in an opening that was neither theatrical nor timid. The prosecutor, a woman with iron-gray hair and a voice that never rose above the edge of polite, told the jury they would see a bottle that looked right and wasn't, a gift that was a weapon, and a plan that was careful until it wasn't. She promised science, video, and testimony. You will also hear, she said, turning her head just enough to acknowledge me without asking me to carry more than I must, from a father who did not choose this, but who chose the truth anyway. The defense promised the opposite. Their opening was warm where the state was cool, an attempt to fold 12 strangers in under a blanket of doubt. The lawyer smiled too much and said the word assumptions as if it were a spell. You will learn, he told them, that what looks like intention could be coincidence, that a bottle can be mishandled by any number of people in any number of places, and that a family's old resentments make for easy stories, but poor evidence. He gestured at Daniel the way salesmen gesture at a sedan. This is a son who tried to bridge a gap with a gift. The state will ask you to see a monster where there is only a misunderstanding. When they called me, the room changed shape, or perhaps I did. The clerk held out a thin book with a cover that had known many hands. I put my palm on it and promised, in words I have heard all my life, to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but. The oath didn't make the truth heavier. It simply gave it a place to sit. On the stand, the wood felt smooth under my fingers. The prosecutor began gently, asking my name, my age, my work before retirement. I answered as a man answers questions in a job interview, a little too carefully at first, then with the ease that comes when you realize there is nothing clever to be gained from cleverness. She asked about Margaret, and I said her name aloud in that room for the first time, letting it do the small work it still knows how to do in me. She asked about my birthday. 70, I said, and a few jurors shifted as if remembering that their fathers might be 72. She asked about the package. It was a square box, I said, brown paper, my name in my son's handwriting. I described the weight of it, the way the glass showed through when the paper fell away, the brand, the note taped to the neck. To Dad, enjoy one last drink for old times. There was a small movement in the jury, a collective breath when I read the words. The prosecutor let the sentence sit, then asked if I had opened the bottle that night. I told her no, that I had set it on the counter under the light and let it glow like an old memory while I decided whether to believe in it. We stepped forward through the days. She asked about Claire and Michael coming for dinner, about the glasses I poured, about the way my hand paused at my own mouth. I didn't drink, I said. I can't tell you why. I could make up a reason that would sound noble. But the truth is, something in me hesitated. I described Michael's color draining, his head lowering to the table as if he had decided to sleep, and his body had betrayed him. I said the number I dialed, the siren that lifted, the way a stretcher makes a room feel smaller than it is. And then I told them what the doctor said, plainly, because there is no benefit in ornamenting a knife. The state asked about the bottle's chain, the police, the lab, the report, and then about the receipt I found folded in the seam of the box. I produced it in its plastic sleeve, and there was a small choreography of hands and labels as it moved from me to the clerk to the judge, to the projector that washed it in pale light for 12 strangers to read. Riverbend Wine and Spirits, I said, and my voice did not shake. I explained the notation, Mimsdar assist, cap check, and the conversation at the counter about band glue and retorquing without a brake line. I said the clerk remembered a man with a phone image of the bottle, that the manager preserved the footage because I asked him to, and that the detective gathered it because that was her job and she is very good at it. When the prosecutor asked me if I could identify the man in the video stills, now on the screen, the ones that had looked like a ghost in a bottle the first time I saw them, I said, yes, and gave the name my wife and I had chosen on a summer afternoon when we were young enough to believe names could protect a child from his worst ideas. The courtroom grew very quiet. Someone coughed, apologetic and small. She did not keep me long. A good lawyer knows not to leave a witness in the open air too long, even if the weather is fair. Mr. Whitman, she said in closing, why are you here today? For a moment I heard Margaret's voice, the way she used to say my name when I had forgotten myself in some small, important way. I looked at the jurors. None of them wanted to hurt me. Not really, but their work might. Because it happened, I said. Because it happened in my house. Because I have a daughter who almost became a widow, and a son-in-law, who is still learning how to breathe with ease, and because a man ought not turn away from the truth when it asks him to stand up. The defense rose smoothly, a man with a silk tie and a talent for friendly knives. He began with condolences, my wife, my age, the sorrow of families that don't fit anymore, and then stepped into the water. Mr. Whitman, he said, smiling in that practiced way, isn't it true that once the bottle left the store it could have been handled by any number of people? In a warehouse, a delivery truck, a sorting facility. You didn't see my client inject anything, did you? No, I said. I saw what I saw. The lab saw what it saw. The camera saw what it saw. He didn't like that answer. I could see it fall through his fingers like dry sand. He tried a different tack. You have had disagreements with your son, isn't that right? About money? About family decisions? About your house? You were estranged for periods. Yes, I said. We did not agree often in these last years. And you resented him for that? I considered the word resented like a garment he wanted me to wear. I grieved it, I said. Grief and resentment are cousins, counselor, but they are not the same. He clicked his pen, a small, impatient sound. You admit you didn't drink the whiskey yourself. You claim you had a hunch. But isn't it just as likely you didn't want to share something special and offered it to your son-in-law first? The question was so absurd that a few heads turned, not toward me, but toward him. I kept my eyes on the wood rail in front of me, the way its grain wandered steadily from one edge to the other, and said, I poured 3 glasses. I set mine down. If you're asking whether I intended to hurt the man my daughter loves, the answer is no. If you're asking whether I sometimes listen to a voice that has kept me alive for 70 years, the answer is yes. He smiled again, but it had grown brittle. You wanted this jury to hear that note in your son's handwriting? Are you sure it was his? Did you have it analyzed? No, I said, but I changed his handwriting for the better when he was 9 and pressing too hard on his pencil. I'd know the way he loops a I if I were blind. A juror in the second row hid a smile behind her hand. The lawyer's eyes flicked toward the judge and back. He saved his last try for the thing that hurts because it is meant to. Mr. Whitman, do you love your son? The room stilled in the way rooms do when the obvious becomes a weapon. I looked at Daniel then. He met my eyes for the first time that day and did not look away. There was anger there, certainly, and fear wearing a mask so thin it glinted. But there was also the boy who once brought me a handful of screws, proud because he had learned left from right. Yes, I said, I love my son. The lawyer's smile broadened as if he had found the seam he needed. And yet you sit here helping the state put him in prison. I let the silence come the way you let a wave pass over you when you know you can stand. Love, I said quietly, is not the same as permission. Loving a person does not make their choices harmless. I am here because I love the truth more than I fear what it will ask of me. He looked as if he might push again, then decided he would only break the stick he was using. No further questions, he said, and sat. The prosecutor declined redirect. The judge thanked me, and the sound of the words, "You may step down," felt like the loosening of a knot I hadn't admitted was there. As I passed the rail, I caught a glimpse of the jurors' faces, serious, attentive, unglamorous in the best way. They did not look like people who wanted to punish anyone. They looked like people who wanted to get it right. I sat beside Claire. She took my hand and squeezed it until her knuckles went white again. "You did right," she whispered, "even if it feels like falling." "It feels," I said, searching for the shape of it, "like telling the doctor where the pain is and watching him cut anyway." That afternoon they brought science to the stand. The chemist with the calm voice described molecules that had names like long roads and how they behave when a human body, wishes they hadn't arrived. The lab tech walked the jury through the pin bore in the cork, the residue on the cap band, the way manufacturers glue versus the way hobbyists do. The store manager testified with the same tidy integrity he showed when he straightened his tie over the register. The clerk remembered the phone photo and the question about retorquing, pronouncing it carefully as if it were a foreign word she had learned out of necessity. And Detective Halstead threaded it all into a single rope the jury could hold, her questions brief, her corrections kind, her patience the kind that can wait out a storm. By the time court recessed, I felt not triumph, but a curious quiet. The thing that had been circling us for weeks had finally landed and shown us its feathers. Outside, the sky had gone honest gray, as if it too had decided the day had had enough light. At home, I wrote in the journal, the pen gliding easier than it had in days. May 3rd. Sworn. Said her name. Said his. Poured 3 glasses in a room that does not forgive pretending. The defense asked whether love cancels harm. It does not. Science held its hand up and did not shake. The truth is wearing boots now. I can hear it in the hall. I closed the book and set it beside the framed photograph of Margaret, in her autumn sweater, standing under a maple whose leaves burned like small suns. We're nearly there, I told her, though I do not believe the dead need updates. The house made the small sounds houses make when they approve. Wood settling, pipes clearing their throats, the refrigerator remembering its task. I turned out the lamp and let the dark take the room, not as an enemy but as a blanket. Tomorrow they would call more witnesses. Soon enough, 12 strangers would be sent into a room with our lives in their hands and asked to speak aloud, the word the evidence had already learned how to say. I did not rehearse my grief or pre-grieve the verdict. I sat in the chair Margaret always said made me look like a proper principal, and practiced instead the one thing that had carried me this far. Breathing without apology, and when sleep came, it came like a verdict I could live with, plain, unadorned, and earned. The trial stretched into its second week, the days blurring together into a rhythm of testimony and cross-examination, voices rising and falling under the solemn hum of the judge's gavel. Each morning I walked the same courthouse steps, the soles of my shoes remembering the weight of them as if routine might soften what was unfolding inside. By now I knew the faces in the gallery. A few neighbors came out of curiosity, others out of loyalty to Claire and Michael. There was sympathy in their eyes when they looked at me, though most were careful not to linger too long. Sympathy can feel like pity when you are sitting on the edge of betrayal, and I needed neither. The prosecution's case had stacked itself carefully. The lab results, the liquor store receipt, the footage from the kiosk. Each piece fitted neatly with the next until the shape of the truth was undeniable. Yet Daniel's lawyer clung to the word doubt like a sailor to driftwood. Could have been tampered with after purchase, he repeated. Chain of custody gaps. He looked at the jury as if they were his confidants, but the weight of science and memory pressed against his smile. When the state rested, a hush filled the room, the kind that comes when everyone knows the shape of a story, but waits to see if anyone will attempt to redraw its lines. The defense called only 2 witnesses. The first was a character witness, a colleague of Daniel's who spoke about his reliability at work, his calm demeanor, his so-called generosity. I listened with a still face, though every word felt like a mismatched puzzle piece forced into place. The second was Daniel himself. He walked to the stand with the same gait he'd had since high school, chin lifted just slightly higher than necessary, shoulders squared against a world that never seemed to praise him enough. He swore the oath with a voice that did not tremble. "Did you intend to harm your father with the gift you sent?" his lawyer asked gently. "No," Daniel said, his eyes sweeping the jury. "I wanted to reconnect. It was his 70th birthday. I thought whiskey would remind him of better times. I never touched the seal, never tampered with it. If something was wrong, it must have happened after it left my hands. His lawyer nodded, satisfied. The jurors wrote in their notebooks, their expressions carefully neutral. When the prosecutor stood for cross-examination, the air thickened. "Mr. Whitman," she said, her tone calm, "if your intention was reconciliation, why did you write the note? One last drink for old times." Daniel hesitated, the smallest crack in his practiced poise. "I meant one last drink to forget the past, to put things behind us. Or to put someone behind you permanently?" He bristled, shaking his head. "That's not what I meant." The prosecutor slid a photo onto the projector. The image from the liquor store video, Daniel's reflection in the cooler glass, the bottle in his hand. "Do you deny this is you?" He looked at it, jaw tightening. "Number, that's me." "And do you deny asking the manager whether the cap could be removed and reseated without breaking the band?" "I was curious," he said quickly. "I'd heard of counterfeit bottles. I wanted to be sure I wasn't buying something fake." The prosecutor let the silence grow, her eyes never leaving his. Curiosity that nearly cost your brother-in-law his life. Daniel shifted in his seat, glancing once toward me. For the briefest moment, the boy I had raised surfaced in his eyes. The boy who wanted my approval, who couldn't bear my disappointment. But it vanished as quickly as it came, replaced by defiance. "No further questions," the prosecutor said, her voice sharp as glass. When Daniel stepped down, the room exhaled. The defense rested. The judge dismissed the jury for the evening, instructing them not to discuss the case outside their chambers. As people rose, Claire leaned toward me. "Dad," she whispered, her voice raw. "He lied." Every word was a lie. I nodded slowly, though inside I felt something more complicated. Lies, yes, but also fear. The kind of fear a man carries when he sees his reflection not in glass, but in the truth bearing down on him. That night at home, I wrote in my journal. May 8th, Daniel testified, spoke of reconciliation, of curiosity, denied intent. The video showed otherwise. His words felt brittle, like glass about to break. Tomorrow, the jury will decide, and so will I, what it means to love without shielding, to grieve without surrendering truth. I closed the journal and set it beside Margaret's picture, the weight of it anchoring me in the silence. Tomorrow would bring closing arguments. Soon after, a verdict, and with it, the final measure of what justice sounds like when spoken aloud. By the time we reached closing arguments, the courtroom felt like a clock wound too tight. Every hinge, every whisper, every shuffle of paper seemed louder than it should have been, as if the room itself had leaned in to listen. I sat where I always sat, 2 rows back between my daughter's breath and my son-in-law's quiet endurance, hands folded, spine straight, the way a man sits when he has chosen his posture and intends to keep it. The prosecutor rose first. She did not stride or thunder. She simply stood with the steadiness of a person who respects the labor of truth. Her hair, iron gray, caught the light when she turned her head. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "we promised you a bottle that looked right and wasn't, a gift that was a weapon, and a plan that was careful until it met evidence." She did not speak of monsters or morals. She spoke instead of what we had seen together. The video from the liquor store, the line on the receipt, memjar, assist, cap check, the pin bore through the cork, the adhesive on the cap band that no manufacturer put there, the compounds whose long names bent the body's will toward quiet. She laid the items down in front of the jury like tools on a bench and asked them to pick each one up in turn. "When you go back to deliberate," she said softly, "you will carry with you not our opinions, but your own eyes and ears. You watched the defendant ask how to open a cap without breaking its band. You saw him package the bottle. You heard the chemist explain what rode in that amber. You heard a father tell you what happened at his table and a doctor tell you why a man nearly did not stand again." She paused, not for effect, but for breath. The law does not require you to find a motive carved on a stone. Resentment is a quiet motive. Pride is quieter still. Intent is not measured by the volume of a man's denial. It is inferred from what he does when he thinks no one is watching. She looked once toward me, not to brandish my grief, but to acknowledge it, and then back to the 12 faces who would speak for the room. "Hold the evidence," she said, "not the noise. Find the truth in it, and say it aloud." She sat. The silence that followed had edges. Daniel's attorney stood with a smile that had worked on other rooms. He used the word doubt the way a mason uses mortar, generously, hoping the wall will hold. He asked the jury to imagine warehouses and forklifts and nameless hands. He said cameras miss things, that science is precise, but humans are not, that families tangle themselves in resentments and then call the knot a noose. He walked along the edge of sympathy, warning them against becoming jurors to grief rather than fact-finders to proof. "My client bought his father a gift," he said. "That is not a crime. Accidents happen in a world made by machines." He gestured with an open palm toward me, the way a man indicates an inconvenient rein. "You heard pain," he said. "Do not convict a man because another man hurts." He even let himself imply that I had poured the first glass for someone else out of stinginess, and a few jurors looked down as if embarrassed for him. He ended with a sentence designed to lodge like a burr. "If there is a place in you, any place at all, where doubt has taken even a single breath, your oath requires you to acquit." He sat satisfied, as if he had affixed the last ribbon to a package. The judge read instructions in a voice polished by years of repetition. The words were familiar to anyone who reads the paper. Burden of proof, credibility, reasonable doubt, defined not as a specter that visits any human thought, but as a real uncertainty rooted in reason and common sense. He told them to consider motive if they wished, but not to require one, to weigh expert testimony with the same care as lay testimony, not more and not less, to deliberate with respect, to choose a foreperson who would ensure every voice was heard. He dismissed them with a nod that seemed to bless and burden in equal measure. When the jurors filed out, the room exhaled. The benches creaked. People rose in that uncomfortable, half-aimless way strangers do when they've attended the same thunderstorm and must now return to their separate porches and discuss the weather. Claire kept her seat, hands clenched white, as if rising would break some small, necessary thread. Michael put a hand on her wrist and looked at me over her shoulder. I could feel the question in his eyes. How long? And could answer only with the helpless shrug of a man who has come to understand time's habits, but not its courtesy. Outside, the afternoon had chosen a thin, even light that made the courthouse bricks look honest. Linda was waiting under the ash tree at the corner, a paper bag from the bakery in her hands. "You'll need something you can eat without tasting," she said, and that made me smile because it was true, and because kindness often wears the clothes of accuracy. We walked the square once, not speaking more than we needed to. "How do you feel?" she asked finally. "As if words have weight," I said, and today they were measured on a scale that does not lie. I hesitated, and as if I am standing in two rooms at once, the courtroom where a father testifies because the law asked him to, and a kitchen where a boy once asked me to taste the frosting on a cake he iced for his sister because he wanted it to be right. She did not offer a piety. She let both rooms exist. The clerk called at dusk. The jury had a question. My heart lurched, then steadied. The questions mean they are working. We returned to find the judge on the bench again, tie loosened by a fraction, as if even fabric knew to relax for patience. The foreperson rose and asked the court to clarify the definition of reasonable doubt, as it applies to circumstantial evidence. The judge read the instruction again, more slowly, his timbre a metronome. The jurors listened as if each syllable had a job. They went back. We went home. Night and worry are old friends. I made tea and did not drink it. I stood at the front window and watched the streetlight halo the maple saplings until they looked like they were wearing small crowns. Claire called to say she was going to sleep at last, and I told her to try, and she said, "Only if you do." And we both knew that was a lie we could forgive. I opened Margaret's journal and wrote by the lamp that has stood on that table for 30 years. May 9th. Closings. The state laid boards across a river. I walked them without slipping. The defense invited fog to do the work. The sun refused. The judge's words were steady as fence posts. The jury asked the right question. I am proud of strangers I do not know. I closed the book and put my palm on the cover, the way a pastor might put a hand on a shoulder. Sleep came in small rooms, doors cracked, lamps left on. The call woke me at 7:18 the next morning, a time I will remember the way men remember the hour a child was born or a telegram arrived. The clerk's voice was bright with the particular politeness of official news. "Mr. Whitman, the jury has reached a verdict. Court will reconvene at 9. The house felt suddenly too small for breath. I shaved with the care of a man preparing to meet a version of himself who has been waiting in a different corridor. I chose the blue shirt again, not for luck, but for continuity, as if the fabric could remember how to hold a back straight. The air outside had the washed clean quality of a morning after rain, though the forecast had promised none. On the courthouse steps, I met Claire and Michael and Linda. We formed the shape of a family that had been rearranged but not erased. Inside, the room was quiet, in the way rooms are when everyone knows that soon they will be asked to hold still for a sentence that will not be improved by rehearsal. The judge took the bench, the bailiff called us to order, and the jury filed in with faces that had moved beyond expression into usefulness. The foreperson held a folded paper, as if it were both fragile and heavy. I did not look at Daniel until the foreperson passed the note to the clerk. When I finally turned, I saw not the boy with frosting on his fingers, nor the man with his jaw set at the angle pride teaches, but someone between, tired around the eyes, mouth held too tight, a person waiting for the language of consequence to step into the room. He did not look at me. For once that felt like a kindness. "Madam Foreperson," the judge said gently, "has the jury reached a unanimous verdict?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Please hand the verdict form to the clerk." Paper moved. Wood creaked. Somewhere in the back row, a reporter's pen paused in midair like a small held breath. The clerk unfolded the paper. The judge nodded once. He returned the page. "Madam Foreperson," he said, "please stand and read your verdict." Claire's fingers found mine and tightened until my ring turned slightly on my skin. Michael bowed his head. Linda did not breathe. "In the matter of the state versus Daniel Whitman," the foreperson read, her voice clear and human, "on the charge of attempted poisoning." The rest of the sentence gathered itself like a wave. I kept my eyes on the wood grain of the rail in front of me. It ran left to right, unhurried, a river that had always known where it was going. And then the word we had all been waiting for, one syllable, old as law, rose in the room and took its rightful chair. The word rang out, guilty. It was spoken without triumph, without malice, only with the calm finality of strangers who had shouldered their duty and returned it to the room. The syllable filled the courthouse and seemed to hang there, as though reluctant to leave, as though it understood the size of what it carried. Claire's breath broke beside me, half sob, half release. Michael lifted his head, his jaw tight, a soldier accepting a battle's end. Linda pressed her hand against my arm in the quiet, grounding me as the echo of that word spread through the benches. Daniel closed his eyes. For a moment he looked younger, almost like the boy who once knelt on the kitchen floor beside Margaret, trying to patch together a toy truck with tape and determination. But when he opened them, the hardness returned. He stared straight ahead, jaw tight, refusing to let his gaze drift toward me. The judge's voice came next, steady as stone. "The jury has found the defendant guilty on all counts. Sentencing will be scheduled for a later date. The defendant is remanded to custody." The bailiff moved closer, and the cuffs came out again. those ordinary steel circles that reduce pride to something manageable. As they clicked around his wrists, Daniel muttered something under his breath, words too low for anyone but himself to hear. His shoulders slumped then, not in surrender, but in a kind of weary recognition that the story he had written for himself was over. Reporters' pens scratched quickly, capturing the moment in ink for papers that would be folded by strangers at breakfast tables tomorrow. The jurors filed out, their expressions unreadable, some looking relieved, others weighed down by the knowledge that their voices had altered the course of a life. I remained seated until the bailiff led Daniel away. Only then did I rise, the wood of the pew cool beneath my hands as I pushed myself up. My legs felt stiff, not from age, but from the long hours of holding steady. Outside, the courthouse steps were crowded. Cameras flashed, questions were thrown like stones, but I gave no answers. My silence was not weakness. It was armor. Words spoken in anger become debts. I had already paid enough. Claire held my arm as we walked to the car. "It's over, Dad," she whispered, though both of us knew it wasn't over. Not really. A trial ends, but the shadow of it lingers. At home, the house greeted me with its familiar hush. The maples in the yard bent gently in the evening wind, their young leaves rustling like soft applause. I sat at the kitchen table with Margaret's journal and opened to a fresh page. May 10th, the jury spoke. Guilty. The word was plain, unadorned, and final. My son looked at me once but did not see me. I saw him, though, not the man in the suit, not the boy with the toy truck, but something in between. It is a hard thing to love a child and to watch him fall. But the truth stood today. It did not bow to blood. It did not bend to silence. It simply stood. And I stood with it. I closed the book and laid my hand over the cover until the ink dried. That night, I poured a glass of water, not whiskey, and lifted it toward the photograph of Margaret on the mantel. To patience, I whispered, to dignity, to survival. The house was quiet, but in the stillness I felt her presence, the way I always do when I have done something difficult and necessary. And for the first time in many weeks, I slept without the weight of waiting. Sentencing days have a different gravity than verdict days. A verdict decides what happened. Sentencing decides what it means. I woke before dawn not because I feared the outcome, but because some part of me wanted the house to see me clothed and upright, wanted the maple saplings outside to find me already at the window, practicing the art of breathing in a world that had grown narrower and truer at the same time. I shaved, pressed the blue shirt that had carried me through the long weeks, and buttoned the cardigan Margaret always claimed made me look wise, whether or not I felt it. By the time the sun climbed the neighbor's chimney, I was on the porch, the newspaper folded beside me, the tea cooling in the good cup we used on Sundays. The courthouse had the same smell, polish, old paper, the faint citrus of cleaner, as if buildings, too, have rituals they perform when the day requires steadiness. Claire met me on the steps, her hand slipping into the crook of my arm with the quiet certainty of a daughter making a promise she intends to keep. Michael followed a half-step behind, color back in his face now, the lines around his eyes softened by sleep and the passage of fear. Linda was there as well, not because she loves courts, but because she understands that some rooms are too large to enter alone. Inside, the pews were fuller than they had been for the trial. Sentencing draws people who like endings, even when there are none. A reporter with a gentle manner nodded toward us. The rest kept their distance, sensing perhaps that words spent on the stairs were not words I could spare. When Daniel was brought in, he wore a suit again, darker this time, and a tie that spoke of someone else's careful hands. He looked thinner. Guilt steals from the body even before a judge has the right. He did not look toward me. I did not insist that he should. The judge took the bench and reviewed the file, as if the pages could confess anything he had not already heard. "We are here for sentencing in the matter of the state versus Daniel Whitman," he said, voice level and unadorned. I have considered the presentence report, the parties' submissions, and the statements I am about to hear. He looked to the prosecutor, then to the defense, then to us, the strange congregation gathered for the last rite of a long service. Victim impact statements came first. They offered the podium to Michael, who rose with care but without trembling. He spoke plainly, the way good men do when the point is not performance, but truth. He described the night at my table in a handful of sentences, each one a plank laid over water, the first sip, the sudden heat under his skin, the way the world went dim at the edges, the siren like a thread he followed back to the bright. "I'm not here to demand suffering," he said at the end, glancing toward the bench rather than the man who had nearly put him in the ground. "I am here to remind the court that choice matters. He chose this, and we are still choosing to live." Claire spoke next. She did not cry at the podium. My daughter is a woman who saves her tears for rooms that have earned them. She talked about the way fear makes a house sound different at night, about the months she had learned how to sleep inside a question, about the ache of walking past a photograph from a summer when two siblings laughed into a camera like there would never be a winter. "I don't ask for cruelty," she said quietly. "I ask for weight. Let the sentence have the weight his choices put on our lives." They asked if I wished to speak. I did not want to at first. Not because I lacked words, but because I feared spending the ones that should be saved for the silence at home. But I stood, and the room did the small rearrangement rooms do, when an old man rises who has carried his back straight all his life. At the lectern, the wood was warm under my palms. "Your Honor," I began, because there is a dignity in naming a role by its honest name, "I am a father. I was a principal once. I have spent my life asking boys to tell the truth when they didn't want to and to accept the consequences when they thought they could outrun them. I did not expect to be doing that work here." I didn't look at Daniel. I looked at the judge, then at the jury box, empty now but not forgotten, then at the flag in the corner that belongs to all of us and none of us. I'm not here to ask for the longest number you can say. I am here to ask for a number that teaches. A sentence that tells my son what I have been trying to tell him since he learned to tie his own shoes. That your life is the sum of what you choose when no one is watching. I paused, because silence can carry a sentence farther than breath. "I love my son," I said, knowing the defense would nod as if I were reading from their script, and knowing it was not for them. Love is not permission. Love is a promise to stand where truth stands, even when it is at a distance from the one you love. Give him a sentence that includes room for work and for learning, but do not spare him the weight. He needs it. We all do. When I returned to my seat, Linda's hand found my sleeve and rested there, a small mooring line that held. The defense spoke of childhood and stress and pressures I had not named. They spoke of charity work done on weekends I had not witnessed, of a boss's letter, of a neighbor's petition, of remorse that had, thus far, not found words outside a lawyer's mouth. They asked for leniency that would have suited a different case. The prosecutor rose only to remind the court that planning is a word with corners, and this plan had them. A purchase, a question, an injection, a package, a note. She did not thump the table. She did not need to. The judge folded his hands and looked out over us the way a man looks over the fields he has tended long enough to know where the stones are. "Mr. Whitman," he said, turning to Daniel, "the jury has found you guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. I have reviewed the evidence that brought us here. I have read the letters offered on your behalf. I have listened to your family with the attention they deserve. This court is not a place for vengeance. It is a place for proportion." He glanced down at the file and then back up, and when he spoke again, the room leaned forward as if it had one body and one set of lungs. "On the count of attempted poisoning, I sentence you to 12 years in state custody. On the count of aggravated battery by means of a harmful substance, 8 years to run concurrent. On the count of reckless endangerment, 5 years probation to begin upon release, with mandatory counseling and community service focused on victims of violent offenses. You will receive credit for time served. You will have the right to appeal. You will also have the opportunity, if you choose, to become a different man than the one who stood at that counter asking how to make a cap look unbroken. He paused, letting the arithmetic of it settle. I hope you choose that. There was no outcry, no slamming of fists. The gavel did not need to work beyond its usual duties. A pair of deputies approached my son with the compassion professionals reserve for the moments when mercy consists of doing a hard thing gently. The cuffs closed, and something in my chest unclenched. Not satisfaction, not triumph, but the release that comes when a muscle has held its flex too long. As they turned him, Daniel's eyes met mine. For the first time since the verdict, his expression changed, less defiance, more confusion, as if the map he had been using had been taken from his hands and replaced with a blank sheet and a pencil. He opened his mouth and then shut it, and I could not tell whether the words that died there were apology or accusation. Perhaps they were both. They always were, with him. We walked out into a noon that had decided to be kind. The light lay evenly on the courthouse steps, neither celebratory nor severe. Claire pressed her forehead briefly against my shoulder. "Does it feel like justice?" she asked. "It feels like the truth wearing numbers," I said. "I can live with that." At home, I did what men do when large things have finally sat down. I made a sandwich. I ate half of it and set the rest aside and brewed tea I actually drank. The house relaxed by degrees, as if its beams and joists had been clenching with me. The clock in the dining room remembered its work. I opened Margaret's journal and began the last entry I would make about courts and counting. May 24th. Sentencing. 12 years plus 8 concurrent, probation to follow. Counseling required. The judge did not thunder. He placed the weight where it belonged. Michael stood and did not shake. Claire spoke like a bell heard over water. I said the thing fathers hope never to say and kept my voice. He looked at me as they turned him. The look will stay. So will the choice I made to stand with the truth when it asked me to rise. I set down the pen and pressed my hand flat against the page until the ink lost its shine. Outside, the saplings shifted in a small wind. A bird landed on the fence and considered the yard like a customer considering a table by the window. I poured a glass of water. Then, after a long minute, I opened the cabinet where the good bottle lives, the one Margaret and I kept for anniversaries, and poured a finger into a small glass. I did not drink. I set it on the table and let the room hold it, the way a chapel holds a candle. When evening came, Linda joined me on the porch, and we watched the street become itself. Dog walkers, the boy on the bicycle that's a size too big, the couple who hold hands like a habit learned late. She did not ask me whether I was all right. She asked whether I had eaten the second half of the sandwich. I told her I had. We sat in the friendliest quiet I have known in months. Before I went to bed, I carried the untouched whiskey to the mantel and set it beside Margaret's photograph. "Not tonight," I said. "Tonight belongs to breath." I turned off the lamp and let the dark do what it does best. Gather the edges and soften them. Remind a house it is a home. There will be letters and hearings, perhaps an appeal. There will be days when I miss the boy who used to fall asleep in the back seat on long drives, and moments when I mistrust my memory, because it has the bad habit of making saints of children and villains of men. But the work that mattered is done. The line has been drawn, not across land, but across the part of me that could have chosen quiet instead of truth. Tomorrow I will water the saplings. I will sweep the porch. I will write to Michael's mother to tell her he is well again. And when the kettle whistles, I will take it off the heat and say aloud, as if the house were a companion that deserves an explanation, "We did not bend, we did not shout, we stood." And the house, faithful as ever, will answer in its way, by holding, by keeping, by being the place where justice came to rest and found a chair it could sit in without apology. The weeks after sentencing felt quieter than I expected. Quieter, not lighter. Justice does not erase, it arranges. The weight remains, but in a place you can carry it without stumbling. Neighbors spoke to me differently now. At the market, the cashier placed my groceries in bags a little more carefully, as if they might break. At church, people paused a second longer when, shaking my hand, their eyes searching mine for something they couldn't name. Sympathy, respect, pity. They all bleed together when people don't know which word to choose. I didn't mind. Words are clumsy around wounds that are both fresh and permanent. Claire and Michael visited more often. They filled the house with the kind of conversation Margaret used to stir into every room, the rhythm of daily things. Claire baked bread again in my kitchen, the scent clinging to the curtains like forgiveness. Michael brought me seedlings for the garden, saying, "It's time we added more life around here." Their presence was not a cure, but it was a balm, and I let it soak into the cracks of my days. Daniel wrote once from the county facility, before he was transferred, a letter in his cramped script, 3 pages of circling words, half apology, half blame, half silence. A man can put 3 halves into a letter when he doesn't know which truth to tell. I read it once, folded it carefully, and set it in the drawer beside Margaret's journal. Not to hide it, not to treasure it, simply to give it a place to rest until I am ready. On the porch, Linda sat with me most evenings. She never asked about the letter, never asked what I saw in Daniel's eyes that last day. Instead, she spoke of her roses, of the high school baseball team, of small things that keep a town upright when storms try to bend it. Her laughter filled the quiet, and sometimes I caught myself smiling before I realized I had. One evening, as the sun fell behind the maples, I went to the cabinet where Margaret's good bottle still waited. I poured a single measure into a glass, not from the poisoned gift, not from anything Daniel had touched, but from the bottle that held only memory and time. I carried it to the porch where the air was warm and the crickets had begun their hymn. I raised the glass, not high, not in triumph, but steady. To Margaret, I whispered first, because she taught me how to carry both love and truth without letting one drown the other. Then I added, to patience, to dignity, to survival, and to the weight of justice, which found its place at last. I drank slowly. The burn was familiar, the warmth spreading into me not like fire, but like the steadying heat of a hearth in winter. And as I sat there, glass in hand, Linda at my side, the house steady behind me, and the maples swaying gently in the dusk, I realized something simple. Revenge had never been the point. Not even justice, really. The point was to stand, to keep standing, even when betrayal tries to break your knees. I had anchored it all where it mattered, in the soil of memory, in the roots of truth, in the dignity that no court can grant and no betrayal can take away. And for the first time in a long time, I felt whole. If this story touched you, don't forget to give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. And tell us, from which city are you watching this story today?